So on stage we got Tom Winter. Tom is an Agile coach with managerial and technical background in one of Motorola facilities in Canada. Privately, Tom is a geocacher. So he already discovered that there's a geocache like 1 kilometer from here, which is, well, which is freaky in a good way. John is a Scrum Master, personally engaged in his local community, organizing there in Ottawa, organizing the Day of Canada and large events, grouping even 20,000 people during a celebration day. So it's a perfect use of Scrum Master skills. And both gentlemen will tell us their story of rolling out Nexus in a fairly large, diverse organization that recently became part of Motorola. I did it right?
You did a great job.
Thank you. The stage is yours.
Okay, thanks. So before we get started, there's a couple things I wanted to cover. First, Ari said that he had that slide that showed we should have lots of tools in our toolboxes, particularly as Agile coaches. So Nexus is hopefully one of those tools that you will be able to add to your toolbox if it's not already in there. So what we're planning to do is talk to you today about what Nexus is and within our project, how we used it. Our presentation takes maybe 25 minutes. We have an hour in this room, so our goal is to have a conversation with you. So I think the agenda said that this was a lecture, but we don't think of it as a lecture. We want it to be a conversation. So we have some bribes up here. If you ask a question, you will get a candy. It's a good Canadian product here. It's a combination of maple and ice wine. So a little bit of integration keeping with our Agile theme today. So we've got integrated product here to give you. So you ask a question, you get a candy. Over to you, John.
There we go. Thanks, Tom. So as Mikhail already introduced us, so we're from Motorola Solutions in the emergency call handling team. We're responsible I'm a Scrum Master for our CC911 Nexus. You'll hear about what CC911 is in a minute. That's the project that we're currently working. Tom is our Agile coach for the emergency call handling team. In the context of the project we're talking about, where we've employed Nexus, we're distributed across 4 different locations, 2 in the United States, in California and Birmingham, Alabama. We have our lab in Gatineau, Quebec, and we have a team here in Krakow. So I guess right away at a glance, you can see part of our challenge is there's 9 hours of difference between a team in California and a team in Krakow. In addition, we have dependencies on some engineering teams that are in Seattle and in Chicago, and additional teams here in Krakow. So that's part of our challenge as well going forward. So we'll talk a bit about that and what that meant for us. As mentioned, feel free to ask questions anytime. We'll gladly take them, and you'll get a candy. So what we're going to do today is share where we're at with Nexus. It's still new to us as well, but we've learned some things along the way so far. So we'll talk a bit about our project, a bit about why we chose Nexus. We'll go very high level about the Nexus framework itself and how we've applied it. Some of the challenges and learnings we've had as we've deployed Nexus, and some recommendations. And we'll have some final Q&A and discussion, but feel free to jump in any time with any questions you have.
Okay, thanks, John. So before we get into Nexus, we wanted to talk a little bit about our project so you understand the context of the Nexus implementation that we've done. So our project is called Command Central 911. For those that aren't familiar, 911 is North America's central emergency call number. So it's equivalent of 112 in Poland. So if it helps you, you can think of this as Command Central 112. The picture you see here on the left is our current product. What we sell is largely a set of software applications that help call takers, emergency call takers. So when you dial 112, that person at the other end that you're talking to could be looking at something like this. So it shows them a variety of information they need, incoming calls. It's showing them potentially maps of where people are located. Might also be showing them aspects of the office that they're in. So how many call takers are available, how many call takers are currently handling emergency calls. So this product is largely a software application, but underneath it we're selling servers and PCs, so it's all hardware based on-premise with our customers. What we're going to, our future, is we're going to be plugging into the cloud. And so this Command Central 911 project that we're talking about, that's the piece where we're going to connect what's existing. We're going to extend our capabilities and connect to the cloud. So some of you here in Poland, I think our CTA team might be getting into the Cloud Connect business. So they're going to be helping us out as well with how we connect. So looking at the challenges of our project, we had several things that were happening simultaneously, so lots of challenges for us to work in an Agile context. So firstly, we transitioned from Waterfall to Agile right at the time that we staffed up this project. So they had the technology challenge, the project challenge at the same time that they had an Agile transition challenge. We had our existing product. So as I talked about here, there's actually two different products there. So Vesta was one of them. We were acquired by Motorola at some point in the past. And then we also had another company called CallWorks that was making a competing product, a competition for Vesta, that also got acquired by Motorola. So now we've got these two different, what used to be competitors with competing products, now part of the Motorola family. And of course, part of what we're trying to do is harmonize that. So as we go over here, this starts to look like one cohesive product within the Motorola family. So we had a monolithic stack. It was an opportunity as we did this project to re-architect our software. So we're re-architecting to microservices. And of course, that's a challenge because we have to learn how to work with microservices. We're also developing on the leading edge of Motorola's CI/CD cloud infrastructure. So for those of you that are working in Motorola in the cloud, you realize what's happening is that as you develop your product, the Motorola cloud team is also developing the infrastructure underneath. So it's a little bit like the rules changed from time to time on this cloud that we're building on top of. And as I said, we had two distinct legacy products. And to let you know the size of these products within the United States, we have about a 2/3 market share. So we've got thousands of these systems deployed across the United States. So of course, we have to make sure that we work into that legacy without disruption. And finally, I talked about these two companies that were acquired by Motorola. John had presented where we were from. So on the North American side, that was the two companies that got acquired, and Poland we think of as Motorola proper. So we're trying to figure out how to bring these three different cultures together.
Thanks, Tom. So just to look sort of at a timeline of how things have developed. So we had our Vesta next generation product development started around 2016. It was understaffed. It was only a small portion of the team, and it ended up being very much waterfall development, a lot of time and requirements and that sort of thing. The CallWorks team started their next generation product in 2018 as a proof of concept. As we brought the teams together to have the Motorola CC911 project, that started off last year, but really kicked in and really got staffed up in January of this year. So we've and it was very explicit around the staffing and the transition to Agile. At that point, we had 4 teams across 3 different time zones. We didn't have Krakow involved yet. And we started in that mode, and that worked well. We had the 4 teams working through their backlogs. We had product owners associated with those teams, and we started working on our microservices and components that were required for our eventual CC911 project. We continued on that mode in a way and started to have retrospectives and see some of the challenges that we were going to face going forward. In around April, May timeframe, we had to do some staffing changes to accommodate some of the legacy products. So we shifted some work, and we also, that's the point where we also brought in the team here in Krakow, so, which brought in, so then we had 5 teams working together and spread over 9 time zones, so 9 hours of difference between California and Krakow, as I said, which made meetings a challenge. At that point, we started to look at the Nexus framework, which Tom will tell you more about now.
Okay, so given that this is an Agile event, we expect that all of you are familiar with Scrum. Even though we expect that you're familiar with it, we wanted to give you a quick overview because you'll see how it ties into Nexus. So we start with the product backlog, which is all the things we know that we need to do in order to make this product that we're trying to create. As we start our sprints, we do a sprint planning activity that creates a sprint backlog. So we take a small piece of the product backlog and we decide this is something that we're going to work over the next few weeks. We have a Scrum team, which is 3 to 9 people. They work on it. They have their daily stand-up, which I guess, according to Ari, doesn't necessarily happen daily. It does for us. So we have our daily stand-up, and at the end of the sprint, we have a sprint review where we show off what we've done. We have a product increment, so something that ideally is releasable, and then we have a sprint retrospective that feeds back into the next sprint. Okay, so John was talking about what we were doing with the teams before Nexus, and he was saying how the teams were working well. So, what we had at some point in time is we had 4 teams. They were each producing their output. But if you, if you look, it's hard to understand exactly what these pieces are and how these pieces would come together. So, we had our set of stakeholders and we were trying to figure out, well, what are we going to show them and how are we going to convince them that we're doing good work? Because we have these pieces, but they don't seem to fit together. So, we started to move to a different view and say, rather than these pieces that you can't figure out what they are, let's start working towards the thing that has true customer value, that thing we're really trying to create. So, the teams knew the value was in the integration, but of course there's always that temptation that you just work on your own stuff and somehow, sometime later, the integration is going to happen. That true business value is going to come out. So we had to move to a single backlog. And so again, if you get a single backlog instead of 4 separate backlogs, it starts moving you in the right direction towards delivering this business value. And we also needed a framework, some method that we were going to use in order to prioritize these interdependencies, as well as help the teams understand, you need to be working together on that picture on the right, not the picture on the left. So we decided to adopt Nexus. Now, I showed you the Scrum framework, intentionally so it would lead into this slide. And as you can see, what you're looking at here looks very, very similar to Scrum. And the reason is because Nexus is Scrum scaled up. So we start out with the same product backlog, and again, that's meant to be a single product backlog. And now instead of sprint planning, we have, sorry, John, if you want to click here, I was jumping ahead a little bit. So I'm going to take you through some of the differences between the Scrum and the Nexus. So here, instead of having one Scrum team that consists of 3 to 9 members, we have 3 to 9 Scrum teams. So again, it's just a straight scaling up of things that we already know. We do add in here a Nexus integration team. So the Nexus is composed of all of the people who are on your project. The Nexus integration team pulls a representative out of each of the teams. And what it does is it provides guidance towards the Nexus to help the Nexus go in the right direction. Okay, we have additional events as well. So you can see here, each of the team maintains their daily scrums, just like they always have. But in addition, we have a Nexus daily scrum. And the idea with these Nexus events is we're always trying to say that the integrated view that we're trying to create in this sprint is more important than the individual team view. So the individual teams are actually contributing into this integrated piece. That's their priority. And of course, if they have other time, perhaps they're doing work that's their own work. Okay, so then looking at the major ceremonies, we have the sprint planning. And as you can see here, it's now a 2-stage plan. So we have a Nexus planning and then that goes into individual Scrum team plannings. So what we're doing with this Nexus, what it brings is, it brings that integrated product focus. The first thing we're going to do is figure out what we're trying to deliver, what our sprint goal is at an integrated level, and then the teams figure out how they're going to contribute to it. Similarly, when we have our sprint review, there's no longer team sprint reviews, there's just a single Nexus review. So when you present to your stakeholders, you're not presenting what the individual teams did, you're presenting what that global team did. You're showing them the product development that you're making. And we also have retrospectives as we did before, but again, they're implemented differently. You can see this is a 3-stage. So in this case, you start with a Nexus retrospective and say, what did we do well? Where do we need to improve? That then goes back into the individual sprint teams who look both at their contribution to that overall Nexus as well as their individual. So they're now doing a sprint review at 2 levels. You know, the global level of the whole product as well as themselves. And finally, it feeds back into a Nexus where the individual teams can feed their input into what happened from that original Nexus view. So, you know, that then feeds back, and again, we have the same framework that we had in Scrum, but now we're continuing to focus. So the whole focus of this is this integrated increment. Right. So again, what we're trying to do is say that we don't care as much about what the teams deliver. What we care about is what the integrated set of teams deliver. Yes.
This Nexus integration team. Oh, can be.
Yeah.
Is it the virtual team or real team? I mean, is the teammate in Nexus integration team is also a person who is part of the Scrum team in Nexus?
That's an excellent question. I assume you could all hear it. And actually, as it turns out, we went to the very slide that'll help answer your question. Okay, so what you have here in this big blob is you have either the Nexus or the project team, whichever you want to call it. So the idea is that all members of the project are potential members of the Nexus as well. So what we're showing here is we're showing various Scrum teams, and you can see within the Scrum team, they've each got a Scrum Master. We also have this darker blob here, which is the Nexus integration team. So it's got a product owner, it's pulled a Scrum Master out of one of the teams, and then it's got members from each of the other teams. So what we're showing here is that the Nexus integration team has pulled somebody out of each team so they can get the perspective of each of the teams. It's okay if people want to add more members into the Nexus integration team or more members contributing into Nexus. So this is one of the things we're going to talk about, is this balancing act of how we balance between contributing within your team and contributing within the Nexus. Yeah, I'll get to you in just a minute. So, you know, if I just talk the role of the Nexus integration team, they're very much the leaders, and they're kind of setting the direction of where the project goes. And the Scrum teams, of course, do the integration work, but the Nexus integration team remains accountable. Yeah, question?
Anyone Scrum team Nexus team?
Okay, so the question is, can a Scrum team participate in more than one Nexus? So my answer to that would be yes, it can. But you know what you have to do, of course, is you have to maintain your understanding of what you owe into each of these projects now. So I think what you're suggesting is perhaps this Scrum team here is a member of a Nexus over here as well. Now, John is going to talk about this more. So if you don't mind, I'm going to sort of defer your question. And if you don't like the answer that John gives you, then we'll try again.
Okay, any other? Okay, so now we're trying to figure out. Okay, so we heard about frameworks this morning. This is a framework. You know, we heard about the safe experience and how that the challenges there. I guess the question is sort of, okay, we have products, we have teams. You know, we're doing Scrum. You know, when would this work, right? So Nexus is really meant to work with when you have a single product and a single product backlog and multiple teams. There's other combinations here where, you know, a single product, a single team is Scrum. Obviously, if you have multiple products and multiple teams, that's where you have multiple Nexuses. So for us, this was where we were at. We had a single product, a single team, single product, multiple teams, and so we chose to try this out for our situation. So this is what's sort of the recommended. This is where we are at. I guess just wondering at this point, as we sort of transition into, we all want to hear from you as well. Have you had exposure to Nexus? Have you tried Nexus? Show of hands, anybody that's tried Nexus before? Was it in a similar situation or different situations? Anything anyone would like to share at this point on their experience?
So just to repeat that in case other people didn't hear, she was saying that they did try it, but they thought that they had originally thought they had one product and found out they had multiple products. So I'm guessing what you're saying is Nexus didn't work that well for you.
We had to have one product backlog.
Okay.
We need to have one product backlog to finish it. So we realized that it's not a good.
Right. So having multiple product backlogs is definitely going to be an issue. So, related to your question back there, you were, a little bit in this zone, but not really, right? You were splitting a Scrum team across 2 different Nexus. And I think that's okay. I think, that team is just going to have to understand what all of its deliverables are. It's going to have a responsibility into each of the Nexuses and potentially responsibility into each of the Nexus integration teams. So as long as they're capable of feeding those 2 different projects, I think it can work.
However, it does create a dependency between the Nexuses that you might not want to create, because that's a complexity that you can't necessarily manage if this Nexus blows up and needs that team. So the more you can eliminate the dependencies in the first place. That's.
I think you're talking about the chocolate teams from this morning, right?
There we go. Yes.
There you go.
So, okay. So we decided. So we got trained on Nexus. We decided to go ahead with Nexus, and so some of the immediate impacts we saw, our focus changed, right? So Nexus for us meant. We had a common language to talk about integrated increments and integrated product, because that was our challenge. We needed to get to a point where teams were not working in isolation based on their specific product owners' objectives and hoping that it all comes together, but it gave us a framework where we could talk about integrated products. So at all our Nexus events, the first thing we're talking about is what's the integrated activity that we're doing, in the next couple of days. Our Nexus dailies, it starts out with integration concerns, integration activities, what's coming up, what's the dependencies, and making that visible, transparent to everyone. So it really changes the whole conversation from what each Scrum team is doing in isolation to the integrated product, and that keeping that sprint goal, that Nexus sprint goal, front and center throughout all the events. Another impact that's had on us, which so roles and responsibilities change. So previously we had a Scrum Master and product owner in every team. They were all doing sort of equivalent roles within their teams and stuff. When we went to Nexus, we quickly found the Nexus product owner and the Nexus Scrum Master had a lot of more work to do because they were coordinating. Their scope was bigger across the whole Nexus and making sure that things were happening across the Nexus. Some of our in Scrum POs, which is a bit of an anomaly because Nexus says you have by definition, have a single product owner. We still have a team of product owners who are helping refine what's been refined at the Nexus, further refine that into the Scrum team. So we're still in a case where we still have individual product owners as well. Their job responsibilities have dropped a little, similar with our Scrum Masters, where you typically take something to a Scrum Master within your Scrum teams. If we're talking integration issues, the Nexus Scrum Master and the Nexus integration team becomes sort of the natural point where you're highlighting some of those issues and to get impediments unblocked and that sort of thing. Question?
You mentioned about those product owners. So does it mean that you still have kind of components and those teams can't, transfer work between each other?
Yeah, at this point, we're organized by microservice and components, right? So there is still collaboration between the product owners. We're still early days of the product as well, so there's a lot of definition that's happening. So definitely the product owners are helping, the in-Scrum product owners are helping translate that into what does it mean within those teams and stuff. So it's still a valuable role for us at this point. So, yeah, their scope is obviously reduced in our current configuration, right? And that's something that...
If I could add to that, John, I think what Scrum tells us, or, Agile is telling us, you want a single product owner, single product backlog. So you want that level of control, right? So that there's one person deciding where things are going, what will have the most value. And I think the concern with multiple product owners is you start getting this divergence. What we're finding is, because the focus for us is Nexus, that's where, sort of the single source of truth is, the multiple product owners is not causing us an impediment. They're not going in different directions because we're using the Nexus to focus the teams together.
I guess the other change is the Nexus integration team. So we have people that are members of the Nexus integration team that are part-time in the Nexus integration team, but the rest of their time is within their Scrum team. So, but their priority is first and foremost to the Nexus, right? So integration is the goal. So if there's something that blows up from an integration perspective, that's the priority for them, right? Over anything they're doing just within their Scrum team. So so these people are dedicated. Time-wise, it may be a smaller portion of their time, but their priority is on the Nexus, right? So we had to find the right people to be able to handle that. We quickly noticed that preparation for Nexus ceremonies is critical. Because issues are really magnified in the Nexus, which is good in a way because it brings things to the surface very quickly. Example of this, we had some Nexus refinements where product owner came in with epics that we wanted to break down, and we started into that. And quickly we discovered with a lot of people and a lot of participants on a call that really we didn't have clear understanding of those epics to be able to get into a discussion around, okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? How do we break that down? What teams would be involved? So we really stalled, and we found that we really need to be better prepared going into things like the Nexus refinements and the sprint planning and stuff, because within a Scrum team, if there's some confusion, you're working through your sprint and there's some confusion, you consult with your product owner, you go, okay, well, we'll do this for now, and you can move on. It's now you're impacting multiple teams and potentially impacting dependencies between teams as things get further understood as we go. I guess we were warned when we took the Nexus training that Nexus is based on Scrum. So if you're not mastering Scrum, you need to be careful because you need to understand the basics before you actually go. And so do Scrum well before you attempt Nexus. And the other thing is, transparency and communication are key, right? So our conversation is around integration and dependencies and integration points, and that's a challenge. People like to come to a meeting and say, oh yeah, we're making great progress, everything's on track, right? And then you remind them, but you said tomorrow you're going to be integrating with this other team and they have dependencies, right? People need to be, very explicit about, not just what progress have we made, but really it's about where are we going with respect to the end of our sprint, and are we on track, and be able to understand that and adapt as we go. And then communication is, multi-layered. So it's, there's things that need to be communicated to everyone in the Nexus. There's team, inter-team communications and within teams, right? So things that are discussed at the Nexus integration team need to be conveyed back to the Scrum teams, for instance, and that sort of thing. So it's all about interactions and communication, which is what we need and what we desire.
Please share how you actually works.
So I find, so as I say, we're still new to Nexus. I find myself as Nexus Scrum Master, I do a lot of questioning, right? And I'll, ideally, once you're up and running, do you need a Scrum Master to be at every Nexus daily and every Nexus event? Not necessarily, but at this point where we're at, I'm constantly reminding people, okay, so that's great, but what about that thing you said yesterday that this other team depends on, right? So I guess I see my role as Scrum Master to bring those things out and make sure those things are actually being, which means I'm sort of leading the Nexus daily, which may not be organically, it should be happening, but I find myself, as we go through the different teams and stuff, I'll be the one, if I'm aware of things that aren't, being discussed, to point those things out and ask those questions.
I think actually the next slide is going to help with that too, right? Yeah, so there's just a quick summary. So our Nexus to date. So as you notice, we're not experts in Nexus. We've done this for 5 months, but for us, it really helped get the conversations on the right track as far as integration, because that was our challenge. We were developing things for the future that we had no idea when they were going to intersect. One of the drivers for getting ourselves on track with Nexus, Motorola has a customer user summit that actually is happening today, which in Chicago, and we were actually successful in using Nexus to help drive those discussions, work through our dependencies and stuff, so that they're hopefully today successfully demoing what was months worth of work between the different teams to actually to pull that off. And I truly believe if we hadn't gone with Nexus, we wouldn't be on track for that. And so we did hit that successfully. Now it was a demo, so there's exceptions made all the time, but without Nexus, we wouldn't have been able to pull that together from the work of the 5 different teams to make sure that we're on track there for that. I guess our top challenge, so integration issues still do occur. We have we've had a couple sprints where you get it late in the sprint and then people are suddenly saying, well, why didn't you raise this sooner, right? This is news to me, right? Well, we had sprint planning, we talked about it in all these ceremonies and stuff, and yet, it's all based on communication and making sure the right people are part of the discussions, right? Leads me to my next thing is Nexus events are attended by the right people, right? So if we have 70 people in our Nexus and we're doing Nexus refinement or Nexus sprint planning, who's the right people for these particular epics or stories that we're working through? That's a challenge, right? Because one of the requests I had earlier on is, for all the Nexus events, please invite the whole team, because everybody wants visibility because Nexus is new to us and stuff. So then you have a case where 70 people are joining a call to talk about a few epics or stories that are not relevant to the majority of the team, right? So it's finding the right people to have that conversation for so we've been more explicit about, okay, this Nexus refinement, we're talking about these stories. If, you don't need to be there, but we need representation from the teams. So getting that right balance, right? Because or else there's a lot of people spending time on calls for nothing. So we're continually coaching the team, on their role in the Nexus, how the Nexus works. And we're getting there. So, and you can read the other challenges there. We've had some good Nexus retrospectives, right? And Tom mentioned the 3-part retrospective, right? So, first it's about integration. How are we, what are the issues we saw with integration? What went well, what didn't go well? And then it's to the Scrum teams to identify, hey, here's where, some ideas of how I think we can address those things. And that's why we come back afterwards for the second part of the Nexus retrospective to collectively decide on how we're going to address these things going forward.
Sure.
So I have a question concerning the role of Nexus Scrum Master. So when you were explaining about that role, so I had the impression that it's kind of traditional project management, taking care of dependency and integration. It's my gut feeling correct or not really?
So first of all, I am a Scrum Master in one of the teams as well. So we have a team that's very DevOps focused right now, which I'm the Scrum Master for. I'm the Scrum Master of the Nexus integration team. Now, we have a backlog of things that come out of the Nexus. As we do our Nexus retrospectives and identify ways to make the Nexus more effective, we as a Nexus integration team focus as a Scrum team to work through those items. Right? They might be more process related or tool related, or identifying the things and working the things that'll make the Nexus work more effectively overall. So I'm leading that as a Scrum Master from the Nexus integration team, and then at a Nexus level, making sure that the Nexus events are happening.
Yeah. So because usually in the if you have classical Scrum team, so this traditional project management activities are usually done by the product owner. So, but the question is that here we have the switch to the, or not really, to the. So this making sure that the project is going on in the good direction. So do you know what I mean?
So I guess in our Nexus events where we're presenting to our stakeholders and through that whole process, I mean, I'm not tracking our project plan or anything else from that perspective, right? I'm concerned about, are we being effective as a Nexus and as a Scrum team and that sort of thing, right? So we still have people that are responsible for project management and those sort of things to handle the stuff outside of our Nexus, right? The things we interface, the business processes and that sort of thing. There's other people responsible for that, right? So my role in the Nexus is truly as a Scrum Master, not as a project manager or anything like that. But the nature of the things that we address as a Nexus integration team are more, process and how do we improve the effectiveness and efficiency of the teams overall, or jump in to help where needed if things are going off the rails, within a particular sprint or whatever. So. Okay.
Other questions?
Yeah, I have one for you. The first one, how many teams did you integrate your framework? I remember from some of it, you said that up to 8 Scrum teams you were. Up 8 Scrum teams, so much fun.
So 3 to 9 is what the framework is. It's for 3 to 9, like a Scrum team is 3 to 9 members. The Nexus is 3 to 9 teams. We're currently 5 teams, and we're discussing growing that now for some additional stuff coming up, right? So at this point, we're 5 teams.
Another question is, do you have the specialized Scrum teams? What I'm thinking about is, you have the backlog of the product. Let's assume that the top of the backlog are only front. So then you have only one Scrum team for that. Do you have such cases, or your Scrum teams could take any work from backlog?
Now, at this point, we're still very microservice based, right? So we actually have a team that is sort of the front end UI. We have some other teams that are more, full stack, but don't get as far as the UI. And we've got one team that's been sort of leading the charge on understanding our cloud infrastructure and the DevOps type things that needs to be done, so that their focus will change over time, but somebody needs to go in and that sort of thing. So that's how we're sort of. Yeah, and where we're at with deploying to the cloud, there's figuring out what's the right balance of feature versus non-functional requirements, and how do we manage that all, right? So definitely we've got some specialties right now, but the goal is to continue to evolve that.
Another thing for our project, as you're talking about backlogs, we've realized that the non-functional requirements have sort of gotten left behind to some extent. And so, it's good that we've recognized it and we're starting to figure out how to bring those in. And again, we can call that a product owner challenge if we want, but I suspect that's a common challenge. I saw a few nods here as I talked about dealing with these non-functional requirements. So, of course, we're going to have that both, there was questions, I think, around project planning, questions around product backlog. This challenge is going to come into both of those spaces.
Okay, I would like to ask you about managing future dependencies. Have you found a way to efficiently visualize dependency that will come in the future sprints, not in the upcoming sprint, but in the future, just to be aware of what should be completed before you start?
Yeah, so at this point, we're still trying to find the right tooling that'll help us, right? We've done some things in Jira, to identify linkages and those sort of things as we refine backlog things. Not ideal, right? So we're still working through that. We're also moving some of our Jira capabilities to Azure DevOps, Azure boards, right? Which doesn't give us a whole lot more. So we're still, the dependency mapping we'd like to do, we're still learning and trying to figure out. So if you have suggestions on that front, that would be fantastic.
I was going to add something to that too, John. So we talked about the user summit that's happening this week. So, the team was doing development with a long-term focus. And then as this user summit was created and the business team realized they had this opportunity, it tended to vector the majority of the team into this delivery. And so with it being this week, this sprint, I was having this conversation with John where I said, my perception of your planning horizon is it's coming like this. And they're, right now they're planning out to about here because it's all about the user summit. And I was saying, John, that at the user summit, we're going to be announcing that we're going live with the product second quarter of 2020. So about 9 months from now, this is going to be not okay very quickly. You got to figure out how to push that back out again. So, he said, yeah. Okay. Next sprint, we'll have a 3-sprint view. And I went, yeah, okay. And the sprint after. So, trying to push that out, the view of how the team is going to do their development, which of course will lead into the set of dependencies. And I don't think it's going to, again, there's, no silver bullets in all of this. This is all just work. But, I think what you see is these sort of challenges. Mm-hmm. I think there was another question.
So if, I can shout. So if there is a new customer need coming, new requirement, new use case or whatever, what's happening then? Who's breaking it into or translating it into the work that's being done by the Scrum teams?
So the
I was going to take that one.
Go ahead, Tom.
We haven't practiced too much, as you can tell. The reason I wanted to take it, and John will probably say, yes, that was good, Tom, and the reason I wanted to take it, we actually had a number of slides in here talking about one of our challenges, which is a 2-track challenge. So what we saw happen was that as we were working towards this user summit that we've been talking about, we had most of the team focused on the user summit. The Nexus very focused on the user summit, but we also said there's a set of people who aren't contributing to it, and they're contributing to the end goal. So we had this struggle in Nexus of what do you do now that you kind of have these 2 tracks? And I think we made some mistakes along the way where the Nexus became hyper-focused on this, and these people were just kind of off on their own. But we thought, it's okay, right? There's just this user demo, and we'll get past it, and then we'll get back to life the way it should be. Well, at the user summit, they're going to announce our MVP, right? Which is going to come out in second quarter next year. So guess what? We're going to have 2 tracks again. We're going to have an MVP, and we're going to have a set of people that are working not on the MVP. So, this is in effect what you're talking about, I think, this idea of there are other business goals that come in so that we don't have just a single track of development. And so I think where we are right now is we realize the mistakes of our past and we don't yet have the answers for the future. And it feels like a second opportunity to go, John, you need to push out our planning horizon.
So that was Tom's answer. So my answer is, at least everybody knows we have a Nexus PO. So any new requests, whether it's coming internally from the teams or whether it's through our PDMs and the teams external to us, they have to go through the Nexus PO, right? So at least the Nexus PO is putting the backlog on the, is managing that backlog and managing the priorities on that backlog. So at least we've conditioned the team to work towards that, that single point of contact that she'll work with others in the team to work through that. But at least we have a single source of where new requests get funneled to.
So if I understood you correctly, so there's a one PO, or currently there's multiple POs, because I didn't get it.
So currently we have multiple POs,
Okay.
right? So we have our Nexus PO, who makes the decisions on priorities and ultimately on the backlog and what's in there. We have Scrum team POs who are really helping further refine within the Scrum teams, right? So, but anything that comes out of that needs to be fed up, that still needs to be vetted through the Nexus PO, right?
Okay, it's good. The problem that I haven't had is that when the request or the need comes, then you may not even know which component will be impacted. Like, it depends on the solution you architect or whatever. And I was wondering how that happens, right? That kind of initial design or whatever needs to be done to assess who's going to be impacted and where the work will be delegated.
Yeah, so we do have our architects as part of our Nexus that are actually setting the architecture. And it's in the context of that architecture that we're developing this. If there is uncertainty of how that breaks down, the architecture team is part of, we have an architecture representative on the Nexus integration team as well. So if there's something that's not clear or we see the team is struggling with, we can pull in the architects to further define so that we can understand how, do we put a new component or a new facade here, or how does that all work, right? So they're an integral part of our Nexus as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Could you tell a little bit more about Nexus retrospective meeting? You mentioned that it's 3 phases, and can you tell something more about time box or how it is conducted?
Want me to go?
You can try if you want. I can.
Okay, I'll start.
You wanted the last question, so I don't want to hog
You
them
get
all.
to do all the talking. It's not fair. See, I put my slide up. Okay, so first off, if you've read the Scrum framework, scrum.org produces this is how you're supposed to do it. They have an equivalent one for Nexus. So if you're thinking about going to Nexus, you can read it. It's a short document. It's, I don't know, maybe 10 pages long or something like that. And so they have a good section on how the retrospective works, as well as the various other events. So you can read it. And like I say, it does quite a good job of describing. But the way we do it is we start out with our Nexus. And if you remember, as John said, there was a whole set of people who said, oh, you're not telling us what's going on. You need to invite us. So we've now invited 70 people to the Nexus. And, you get people going, oh, this is a waste of my time. Why am I coming? So, you saw under our challenges, you have to get the right people. And so, we're always trying to help the teams, but of course they have to help themselves. So ultimately, you need to get the right teams coming to the Nexus, or the right people coming to it. Now, if I give you an example, this happened in a recent sprint. So there was the Nexus retrospective. Okay, great. And then I attended one of the Scrum team retrospectives. So these people, what they did in their retrospective is first they looked at what came out of the Nexus and they said, what does this mean for us? And they had a lot of complaints about integration. There wasn't enough detail around the integration points, what we were supposed to be doing. There wasn't enough communication between the teams about the integration. People were late and they didn't tell us, like a whole set of things that sounded really important. And then they went into their own team's perspective and really they didn't find much. They were kind of struggling a bit. So I was just there as an observer, and after the meeting was basically over, the Scrum Master said, okay, Tom, you're the Agile coach. What do you think? I said, well, okay, I'm only going to tell you guys what you told me because I just sat here and listened to you guys for the last hour. But what I heard was you had these major problems at the Nexus level that are probably impacting multiple teams, and you had nothing at your own level. as the output of your retrospective, why wouldn't you focus on this really important, meaty stuff? Why wouldn't you take that back to the Nexus and make that the focus of what you're doing in this retrospective? And, you know, they sort of challenged me a little bit, but I think their questions really boiled down to, really, are we allowed to do that? You know, and of course, as the coach, I'm like, I think you're pointing out really important things. I think you should take it to the Nexus and ask them. But yeah, you're allowed to do that. So, you know, that, I don't know if that answers your question, but that to me is sort of the, you know, one way of describing the relationship between this Nexus retrospective and how the individual teams do their own and contribute to it.
And so I would have a question about the integration. So how you do it? Is it done daily? How this, as I understand, pieces of the functionality developed by the teams is integrated at the Nexus level? Who is doing this integration?
So if I could, before you're going to, I think, take this one, I just wanted to say, John, I've got one eye on the clock. I do have one slide left that I wanted to do, which is the key takeaways. So I think maybe we'll make this the last question. I'm trying to be fair to our next presenter. I'm happy to go out in the hall, John, I assume you are, and continue with Q&A afterwards during the next presentation cycle. So anyway, sorry, John.
So how does the integration? So when we're doing our sprint planning, we're trying to make sure we're integrating as frequently as possible, right? So the temptation is teams want to go off and do their thing and then integrate at the end of the sprint, and it's way too late, and we get into problems, right? So trying to make sure we understand those dependencies, keep those dependencies visible, track those dependencies, so that we're doing integration along the way, right, as frequently as possible, right? And that's, as I say, that's been some of my challenges as a Scrum Master, is to keep bringing those things up and going, okay, guys, we had a plan. You know, guys said in the first few days of the sprint, these two teams would be talking and integrating their things. Now, you just told me your coding is going to take you till the end of the week. What's going on, right? And just keeping those things visible. It's been somewhat successful. We've also had some challenges where things got left and pushed, and people say, oh, I need a few more days to code, and I want to refactor something. And it's like, so it's an ongoing challenge, right? And as it is with every, every team and stuff, but that's all the more reason to keep elevating those integration things and saying, okay, guys, we had a plan. It's keeping that plan visible, right? And identifying who's integrating with what this week, today, tomorrow, whatever the case, right? So, yeah, but yeah, it's work to keep that and keep that conversation at the right level so that we're talking about the right things. And because people's temptation is to walk in and go, yeah, no issues. Well, what about tomorrow? Tomorrow you're supposed to be integrating, and you haven't told me anything that you've completed anything to be able to do that, right? So.
All right.
Currently 3 weeks, which people like. I think sometimes are too long, right? Because but we're currently running at 3 weeks.
Okay, so I'm going to do the key takeaways in case you fell asleep sometime during here. So one of the things I'd like to do is I'd like to point to our SAFe 4.0. You know, I think that when we saw that presentation earlier, there was sort of a mixed message. There was good things and there was bad things. I think we're way more in a positive camp here. So we're saying we use Nexus and it's working very well for us. Now, you know, we're not trying to necessarily sell it to you. We showed you conditions under which we think it's going to be effective. So, you know, we're happy also, like I say, to take more questions out in the hall and talk about it. But just to look, use Nexus when the conditions are right. So we've got that single product and multiple teams. And I think we heard from somebody over here where they realized that they had multiple product backlogs that wasn't working so well. It's easy to start. So I showed you the Scrum framework. I showed you the Nexus framework. You know, the pictures were almost identical. So very easy to start. If you know Scrum, you can start your Nexus. It is, however, harder to implement and maintain. So we've talked about communication challenges. We've talked about this, who should be at the meetings. You know, we've talked about dependencies and all these other things. And as John has said, it needs constant attention from the NIT. So the Nexus integration team, they have to continuously help guide. And as John said, as Scrum Master, he thinks he's being way too active and driving things. But, you know, at least for now in the early stages, we have to work that way, and it's working well. Our Nexus changes the Scrum Master and PO role. And again, we talked about us having multiple product owners. So we think it's beneficial if you have a mix of junior and senior members, because what happens is you tend to concentrate more responsibility into the people within the Nexus integration team or the really active members of the Nexus. And so the team members who are on the Scrum teams tend to have a little bit less responsibility. So, again, that's a side effect that you just need to be aware of. So if you have this mix, I think it's going to go well. If everybody's at the same level, well, there's probably some, work that the managers will have to do to make sure everybody's happy. And finally, we're focusing the team on delivering the integrated product. So you remember my slide that showed how the teams were doing well making pieces of a product, but they weren't doing well on the product. And so for us, the Nexus has really helped. And as John said, where we had this user summit this week, we don't think we would have been nearly as successful if we hadn't been using Nexus. So I see people grabbing mics and stuff. I think it's time for me to say thank you all. I see the question. Don't worry, I'll give you candy. We'll go outside. Yes, by the way, people, you can collect your candies. You're welcome.
Thank you very much.